Here's the deepest secret that nobody knows. Here's the root of the root, and the bud of the bud, and the sky of a tree called life. This is an excerpt from the poem I Carry Your Heart by E. E. Cummings. The poem illustrates love in its purest form, a love that is present in this episode's film, Candy. A love plagued by addiction and a struggle to hold on, a connection so ready, so willing to change, but can't. A feeling of desperation that echoes in empty chests, so above to see the light as it reaches the peaks, and so low to the darkest of shadows in the cavernous depths. Two people deeply in love, taken by a vice that will change their lives, spoken in Dan's own words. I wasn't trying to wreck Candy's life. I was just trying to make mine better. Join us today as we talk about the 2006 film Candy. Thank you and enjoy. Just real quick before moving forward, there are some heavy subject matters being discussed this episode and in the film itself, some of which may not be for everyone. These include the following: death, domestic violence, drug addiction, drug use, loss of child. Just a reminder, this film is rated R. So, I picked this movie Candy, right? It's a little bit of a different movie, probably, from what some of you guys...
Super dark.
Yeah. And so this is like an Australian romantic drama, right? It's adapted from, I believe, a novel, I think, written in the 90s. I don't remember the name of it exactly.
Have you seen A Requiem for a Dream?
I have not, no.
It is Jared Leto.
Yeah.
Almost the same exact movie.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
You should check it out.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I'm not familiar with it. Yeah, so it's pretty dark, right? There's pretty heavy themes, pretty dark, but I do like the way it kind of portrays this lifestyle, and it doesn't glorify drug use in any sense, like where you kind of see sometimes in some movies, maybe not like always in the best sense, but usually it's in a kind of a funny way, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's kind of a very real situation that some people find themselves in that are in this kind of lifestyle. So I think this movie is super underrated. I think it kind of flew under the radar when it came out. A lot of movies in maybe the early 2000s kind of did that. You know, I think this is one of Heath Ledger's better acting performances. You know, it kind of goes, you know, back and forth so well, and he dips into those darker roles really well as an actor. I think he's always been pretty good at that. I don't think this movie's for everyone, obviously. I don't think some people would enjoy it, or maybe even hard to watch for some people.
It was definitely, yeah. I did appreciate that they didn't glorify the drug use, but it was hard to watch. Like, I definitely agree with that.
Right, yeah. And I watched this in high school, and I loved it. And I showed my ex-girlfriend at the time. I showed her, and she didn't like it at all. So I was like, all right, that's kind of what I expected. You know, like, not everybody would probably get it. And they kind of split the movie. I don't know if you remember. There was like kind of like a heaven and hell, right? It was like two halves, but they were both totally dark. Like, each one of them. There wasn't like a good or a bad or a good or a bad time for either one. It was all pretty bad throughout the whole thing for the most part, you know. But what did you think, Darth?
So, and I mean, you know probably more of my background than Landry does. I'm going to be honest. It's a good movie. I think it was a great movie. I did not like it. I didn't like watching it.
Yeah.
The whole time I was just like, this is nah, dog. It's so just, it's very realistic. I was surprised at how real they got some of this. I actually did a little bit of a deep dive after watching it. And apparently, so Heath Ledger, he overdosed. So when
right.
Heath Ledger passed away after the Batman movie, that was because of an overdose, supposedly an accidental overdose. Mm-hmm. He used, and he went on an interview saying he used his cigarette addiction to kind of get into the mindset of being an addict.
Right.
But at the beginning of the movie, he's like, I didn't intend to ruin her life.
Exactly.
As soon as I heard that line about him and Candy, his girlfriend or eventual wife, I was like, oh man, I didn't.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just, it's a rough movie. It's a rough watch.
Yeah,
it really is. It's so realistic, and there's only one scene that I'll actually get into the scene a little bit deeper later in the second half of the podcast. There's only one scene that I felt was poorly acted, the rest of it was just incredible. And I think without really delving into that world or knowing about that world, it's easy to write this off as just being a character, right?
Right.
But it's not. It's so visceral that it's uncomfortable to watch. I think it's good.
Yeah.
You know, as a story wise and stuff, it was just, I definitely did not enjoy for the most part watching it. And maybe kind of the same reason that you said your girlfriend at the time, your ex-girlfriend didn't like the movie. I don't know, man. That's a hard lifestyle, right? Like addiction.
It is, yeah.
That's such a brutal disease, being an addict.
Yeah. Yeah.
It literally takes everything. And there's so many quotes in this movie, and I wish I would have wrote down more of them, that they just whoever was in the doing the screenplay of this, and I wish I had this pulled up, but whoever it was that wrote this story, and I think this was actually based on a book, right?
Yeah. It's I think it's Candy, a novel of love, romance, and addiction, or something along those lines, I think is what it's called.
Whoever wrote that book clearly they were pulling from some resource of experience.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that this was fictional in its totality. It had to have been from somebody's life experience, or at least witnessing someone's life experience.
Yeah.
Maybe a mother or father or something watching their child, or even a personal account. And it was just kind of depressing all the way through.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's hard to watch sometimes. I'd waited a while to watch it until I was kind of in the mental space to do it, because I already knew what to expect.
It was, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, Landry, what'd you think?
I was actually really concerned because I kept having to pause it because it was extremely hard to watch. And I was concerned coming into tonight. I was like, they're gonna like be like all this in depth, like they're gonna think it's like the most amazing like movie they've ever seen, and just watched like right through it. I was struggling. It wasn't even like because I was like a bad movie, but it was like they were just. And I know that I don't know if this is the wedding scene was pretty early on, but I remember looking at like Heath Ledger whenever he was like super like out of it, and he was talking to her dad, and he's just I was like he understood the role. Like I was like he has to understand like addiction to that. Absolutely. Like in this sense, and that's I remember that was the first moment that I'd actually like caught my eye like that, to where I was just like, it just like reminded me of like not like of myself, but like of just like watching that and like somebody that like I cared about. And so like throughout the whole movie I just kept kind of like putting that with that. And so like I definitely like believe that's why this movie kind of flew under the radar, because it was hard to watch. But because people like, and that was the thing, because like I studied drug and alcohol addiction, and that's a thing, like obviously like addicts are like looked down upon in society, but in reality like everybody loves an addict, you know, like everyone has somebody that they care about that struggles with addiction. And so I agree that like the reason why this movie is the way it is because like people see the person they care about in those situations. And like because the person I care about is a guy, I extremely like, I feel like that's why I had such like negative feelings towards the female role, or like towards the girl role, you know. And like I'm sure it's like vice versa or whatever, but like I definitely like think that the movie has like some deep layers.
I think addiction, especially nowadays, is very prevalent with maybe obviously probably a different category of drug like opiates and stuff, because depression and everything else is pretty kind of on high the past few years. So I think movies like this kind of ring a different tune as far as how they feel and stuff, and because it's a little more real, because it's probably just about everybody knows at least one person that's struggling with addiction of some kind.
Addiction isn't really limited at all to drugs or alcohol or substance abuse in general. While I will say, probably in my opinion at least, the most gnarly addiction that I've ever seen or really witnessed would be heroin, and the fact that this was dealing specifically with heroin is really rough. Just because that's the kind of drug that it just takes everything.
It does.
But people deal with addiction of all kinds. You look at food addictions, social media addictions, gambling addictions, and those are honestly statistically the most common.
Caffeine too. That's a big one. That's like
caffeine
overlooked.
addiction. Absolutely,
Sugar,
caffeine. I
yeah.
believe caffeine addiction is the single most common. Sugar or caffeine, just because so many people, coffee isn't a big deal. Nicotine's really not that big of a deal, but people have
Socially acceptable.
But yeah, absolutely. But not very many drugs will hold you so tightly as heroin.
Yeah.
And hold you so quickly. You'll see stories sometimes of people they shoot up once and then that's it. At the very, very beginning of the movie. And first of all, the way this movie starts is just
Right off the bat,
crap.
Yeah.
Off the rip, almost every other addiction movie I can think of, even Requiem for a Dream, which I honestly think that movie's a little bit more hardcore in its totality. Mm-hmm. But this starts off so quickly. They're already in Candy and Dan, I believe his name is, right? Heath Ledger's character. They're already in a relationship. And one of the first scenes is her asking to shoot up the drug because she wants to do it the way he does. And you can see in his face, he already is aware that it's not a life for everybody and he doesn't want her to do it. He's like, no, just do it your way. He's like, I'm not a leader. I'm a follower. You don't need to follow what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And she still she wants to try it his way. And she literally starts overdosing. By the way, the beginning of the scene, she overdoses and they inject her with salt water. That is not a cure for overdosing. That does nothing for overdosing. If you ever find yourself in that situation, call the ambulance. That's salt water or sodium water or anything like that. That's not going to do anything for you, except possibly make things worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
But yeah, man, just the way that starts off is just... That's why I think I had a really hard time watching it, because it's just straight from the rip,
Right.
There's really no let up from there.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good allegory for addiction itself is, there isn't really a beautiful stage. They called, like you mentioned earlier, they called one half heaven, they called one half hell. There isn't a beautiful stage of addiction.
Yeah.
There's the illusion, maybe, there's the dopamine of the beginnings. But not very far into it, Candy says, because of this nightmare that you've led me into.
Yeah.
She's aware. You are very aware of the
destruction,
the absolute horrors that you're in. Yeah. Your literal waking nightmare that you're in. She very quickly starts selling herself, her body. Dan, Heath Ledger's character, is selling parts of what makes him human, maybe not in the same sense.
Yeah. What'd y'all think of Jeffrey Rush's character, Casper, the kind of father figure they've had, What'd you guys think of that guy?
I think he was sort of a golden lining, but the same as you get with addiction in general, like even the most beautiful things are corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of lean on him for the help, but what is the help? More drugs.
Right, yeah.
A little bit of money.
He was a bit of an enabler,
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and he definitely cared for them.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more in the second half, but
yeah.
I don't know, man. The movie's rough.
Right, yeah.
That's all.
And with that, I think obviously the acting was really good in this. I really like how well they went from loving each other to like the apartment scene where she's like, I hate you, and like I can't even look at you, and like throwing the ashtray at him, which I think is a little ridiculous, but it's like she kind of lashed out and like busted his head open with it. It's
You have to look at Candy's character, and she obviously has a lot more going on than just the addiction, and they don't explore Heath Ledger's Dan's background at all.
No, I don't think you see his parents.
I almost feel like that's intentional. Huh?
I don't think you see his parents at any point, do you?
No, and they even ask him at one point, later on they ask him if he's told his parents about a specific thing.
Yeah.
And he's like, nope. And that's kind of all. They don't even pursue it more.
Well, on a bit of a lighter note, Landry, do you have any news for us or anything you want to talk about today?
Oh, yes. Okay. So I have a few today. I was today years old when I learned. One of them we just talked about before, but it is that CBD oil is not FDA approved for animals. So
Yeah.
I was like, when we said that, I was like, I should mention that to make up for all the people I've recommended it to without knowing.
I would be curious to see how many things truly are FDA approved for animals, but I know, those kinds of things are so experimental even for humans at this point.
Yeah.
There's like almost no official research on a lot of that.
Yeah, I don't get anything out of the CBD. I've tried different types and different ways, and I haven't felt anything. It made me really anxious one time when I took some, I think it was like a water solvent stuff, and it made me just super anxious. I'm like, this feels like the opposite of what it's supposed to do,
Have you ever messed with, I don't know exactly what it even is, but there's this stuff called kratom.
Oh.
No.
Let me look up what that actually is. Kratom tea, I guess. You either eat it or smoke it or something.
Yeah.
It's an evergreen tea, a tropical evergreen tea, but they sell it to actually, and years ago I was in a head shop buying just some papers or something like that, maybe a pipe or something. Mm-hmm. And there was seriously, while I was in there, 3 or 4 people come in and buy kratom in pretty large amounts.
I think I've never heard of it.
Yeah, the only people I know who have used it did not have like a positive like experience like using it, and I said that it just made them like basically emotionally unstable.
Apparently, it's a coffee family in the coffee family.
Really? No, yeah, I've never heard of it.
Okay, so another one I learned, which I actually like looked this up to see if it's real, and it is. You guys may have already like seen this, but the KFC Twitter account only follows 11 people. It follows the 5 Spice Girls and 6 guys named Herb. This is because of their secret blend of 11 herbs and spices.
That's hilarious. See, some of those fast food like social media things are pretty funny. I don't know who's doing all the work behind that, but
some poor intern somewhere.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I know the Wendy's Twitter account is super spicy.
Top notch, top tier.
Yeah, they start like beef with people and stuff. No pun intended.
Square beef too. They square off. I think they're the ones. I think Wendy's is the ones that kind of started that whole shtick of, maybe KFC was following those accounts first, but I'm pretty sure Wendy's is the one that were like spicy, off the rack. They be coming crazy at people.
Right, yeah.
They wrote the template for everybody to follow.
What about you, Darth? You got anything to talk about?
Yeah, so I saw an interesting story, and I've never actually heard of this game. There was a game coming out called Super Zoo Story, and apparently they've been kind of posting stuff for a while, but they're under some flack right now, and they've made an official statement recently because they're sort of ripping off almost one-for-one Stardew Valley. We've talked about Stardew Valley a couple times. And I posted a screenshot in our server if y'all want to take a gander at that. And that's just one of the many screenshots that I've seen about this. There's no way that this was unintentional. They made a statement, and I guess it's a small development. It's like a husband and wife developer.
Oh, okay.
Basically, they say that any resemblance to Stardew Valley is totally unintentional. Sometimes when you're developing something, you get tunnel vision, a developer doesn't really focus on. But I actually did a little bit of a dive on their Twitter, and there is so many of their tweets that are tagging Stardew Valley, Stardew Valley inspired, yada yada. How do you not like? I just don't get how that's not very clearly, ripping them off.
I just saw it.
I
don't know if y'all looked at that yet.
Super Zoo Story?
Super Zoo Story, yeah.
Zoo Story.
Yep, zoo. The animals.
Okay, I think you said Zeus. I was like, oh.
No.
Oh, wait, this looks, just a glance, even the coloring and everything. Like the graphic does. Oh,
yeah, and we'll post this on the Twitter, just this screenshot or something, but.
It's like, you can look at my homework, just don't make it look too obvious.
Yeah, right. Just change a couple things.
Yeah.
And that's only literally one screenshot. I looked a bit ago about this, and it was just continuous. It's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything about this.
So another thing that really has been exciting me in the news, and I mean, this is something that's been known for a little while, but is coming up soon. And Landry, you've probably never even heard of these games, but there's a remake of the Mass Effect trilogy coming out soon. And it is hands down probably one of my favorite trilogy of games or series of games. Well, I should say series of games because I never actually played the first one. And I actually look forward to being able to play the first one just because it was a little bit kind of dated by the time I got into the series. I don't know, Mikey, have you played the Mass Effect series at all?
I've only played the first one, and I liked it. And I remember somebody saying it was like Dragon Age Origins is kind of, maybe it's the same company. It's like a really similar kind of game, and I enjoyed that game, if it's anything like that.
Yeah, so it's a cover shooter. One of the characters in it is named Joker, and he's voiced by Seth Green.
Oh, that's cool.
You know, what's his name in Austin Powers?
Scotty.
Scotty, yeah. He also does a lot of the Robot Chicken. Most of the Robot Chicken voices, I think he has a hand in producing it or making it at least.
Family Guy, I think, right?
He does, yeah. He's Chris in Family Guy. But yeah, y'all should definitely give it a go. Oh my god, my cat is wanting attention.
I was like, was that your cat?
Yes, he's war crying over here.
Singing the song to his people.
All right, back to the film we were talking about. So one thing I do want to say, obviously, this is obvious. We're not advocating for drug use of any kind. This is like kind of its own thing, and we're not saying to give this a try by any means. But
I don't even think the movie's saying that, to be fair.
No, that's why I said
there's no part, like you said before, there's no part glorifying any of this.
Right, yeah.
You see some movies like Wolf of Wall Street, for example, where they kind of glorify, I mean, obviously it's a different drug, but it makes it look a little fun. Mm-hmm. This isn't an absolute nightmare from the start to the end.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so you have these two characters. They're both artists of some kind. I think Candy was like a painter. Dan was like a poet, right? Maybe like a struggling poet of some kind. They both kind of lived maybe not the best life. You know, they kind of lived in like a machine shop or something. It looked like it was like a little shack looking thing or something.
Yeah, at the around a little bit after the beginning, they're living in the back of an automotive shop.
That's what it was. Yeah. So like we were talking about right off the bat, just dark, you know, like there's already an overdose, you know, you see that whole scene with, you know, him trying to revive her and stuff. And what I guess is their other drug dealer there, which I didn't realize until you see him later.
It's Candy. Yeah, it's Candy and their friend.
Yeah.
I don't think he's immediately their drug dealer. It's one of Dan's friends.
And after that, it's like a downward spiral with both of them, like just totally hooked, you know, on these drugs and stuff. And you kind of see their lifestyles changing a little bit, you know, the point they're getting like real desperate. You know, they start stealing things, and you know, Candy starts selling her body for money.
Yeah, they try to hawk one of her family heirloom rings.
Yeah.
And her paints, which they make a big deal about her being a painter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're saying how in love they are. And then she does this beautiful painting of herself and Dan together. And I think that's supposed to be kind of a turning point when they're trying to hawk her, you know, pawn her paints and her ring. And she comes back, she's like, he didn't want the paints. He gave me $20 for the ring. He said we could work something out. And she goes, and that's the first time she sells herself for drugs.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's sort of like that's the drop on the roller coaster, right? Like that's when they really start taking a terrible turn at that point.
Yeah. So I mean, I think a little while after that, they talk about getting married and stuff. You know, when they kind of in the thick of their addiction for the most part, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of perpetuates things more as well, you know, because you see them, you know, like all with their family and stuff. And like Landry, you're talking about that scene with Heath Ledger while he's like passing out while he's talking to her dad. And, you know, it's like, I don't know, it does feel very real. And it does look, you know, the way they did it was really well done.
I feel like we've all seen somebody, you know, at least once.
Right.
So high that they're falling asleep. Because in your mind or in the person's mind that's doing the drugs, they don't think that you know that they're high, right? They feel like they're hiding it, but it's obvious. It's written all over the walls, all over their face when that's going on.
Yeah.
Heath Ledger couldn't deal with being sober during his wedding, his own wedding reception, that, you know, he goes and gets high, and as soon as he goes in the bathroom, Candy's knocking on the door. You know, she's like, you greedy little pig.
Yeah.
You know, share the drugs with me.
Yeah.
And her poor parents, I don't think any of the people are supposed to be Heath Ledger's parents. It's kind of about her. The movie's titled after her name,
Yeah.
so...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like, the thing with Dan is, though, he was kind of a bum, right? Like, he kind of seemed like, he's like, oh, I'm helpless with this and that, and, like, he didn't really do a whole lot, like,
Yeah, she even says he's helpless multiple times.
Yeah.
Candy does, yeah.
But at the same time, you know, with that scene with the identity theft, you know, what'd you guys think of that? Where it's like, he seemed like to have like kind of a gift, or maybe a little intelligent in that area. Landry, what'd you think of that whole scene?
I am not even gonna pretend. Whenever he called him to get like his pen, and he was asking all those questions, my mind kind of wondered, and I was like, when banks call people for this information, do they have a script that they're reading off of? Because I was like, he is doing it so well. I was like, I would just imagine that they would be reading off something, and because I was just thinking like, I was kind of like real time, where
you're like, I would totally fall for this.
Yes, because I would be like, so
People get scammed that way a lot.
Yeah, I would definitely add some or, you know, like obviously like not, but he did it really well, and so it kind of made me like, I wondered a little bit about like how that actually happens.
Yeah.
And, you know, he even says at one point, and I believe, so the reason why he ends up scamming a guy is because Candy has been prostituting herself for a while, and she's like, you should start selling your body, you know, for our drug. And so he's like going to this bathroom to try to maybe dip his toes in the water there. He finds this dude's wallet in his car, his unlocked car. But I don't remember exactly where this quote happens, but Heath Ledger's character, Dan, he says at one point, like, you would be amazed to know how far someone will go. And then he says, you know, the anxiety of it is a full-time job. That setting up, and I believe he says that part at least right before this scene takes place where he's scamming the guy in the bank. I honestly expected almost the rest of the movie for the cops to show up at a random point and like bust him for this. I didn't think he would get away with it, which he clearly did, or at least to our knowledge. It just shows you, you know, how well preserved he was, how smart he was, that was just pure addiction fueling that.
Yeah.
You know, he was clearly a brilliant man. He was clearly an intelligent person. I mean, Candy was obviously really smart and a pretty good painter. Yeah. You know, at least the stories paint, you know, from what they show in the story.
Yeah. Kind of abstract.
And that just goes to show the waste, you know, the waste that happens.
Right, yeah. And you see that with artists of all kinds, musicians, you know, they kind of get caught up in drugs, especially heroin. You know,
man. I'm like Lane Staley.
And that's always the thing I've been kind of had in my mind about heroin, especially. It's like, it's not like when you're gonna die. It's like it's a matter of time. Like, not if you're gonna die from it. You know, it's like, you know, it's like when
for
it's gonna
sure.
happen.
Yeah.
This is like kind of it's related, but it's kind of like off topic. But when I was kind of thinking about, or like when I was watching and just seeing like how realistic it was, it reminded me of, I don't know if you guys like Alice in Chains, but it reminded me of the MTV Alice in Chains. Or Lane Staley, yeah. Of the MTV Unplugged or the MTV Unplugged like series that they did, or like the of Alice in Chains, where he's just like got his sunglasses on and he's like very obviously just like completely out of it. And like Jerry Cantrell talked about it later and said that it was like really hard for him during that performance because he was watching like his closest friend just like kill himself like in front of him, because like that was a very that was when, I don't know, like my dad, because he watched it like as it was happening, and he said that he was watching with friends, and one of his friends said like, we're gonna watch him like die in front of us, basically, like not right then, but you know, just the disease just kind of take over him. And I feel like it definitely portrayed that really well, like in the movie.
Yeah. I mean, like we were saying, it's another example of like, you know, somebody really talented artist or somebody with a gift, obviously. And I think it was heroin. I think it was like heroin that killed him as well, I believe, overdose. So we have the scene kind of in closure. He gets the money, right, from pulling off his little scheme. He shows back up to the house with like flowers and stuff, and he's like stoked because he pulled the thing off. And we get the news that she's pregnant. That was kind of really, that's kind of like, oh god, it's not even like as an audience member, whatever. It's like that doesn't sound like a good idea,
Yeah, that's probably one of the most uncomfortable scenes, or leading up to one of the most uncomfortable scenes, their attempted detox, But just to back up a little bit, what I was saying earlier about the kind of the worst acted scene, and I maybe I'm reading too much into it, but when she throws the ashtray at his head, that scene leading up to that, when she's irritated by everything, and I understand that portion, but obviously if you're an addict, you're going to be irritated by a lot of things. Obviously at that point, she's really tired of just the lifestyle and being an addict, but it felt just kind of forced. She's like, oh, the light's bothering me. And then he's literally under a blanket watching the TV an inch from the face. But that's really what it does. It screws up your personality. It makes you irritable. It makes you, and maybe they didn't have the drug at the moment, and that's a huge part of withdrawal. Yeah, I thought they were in England for most of the movie. I didn't realize that they were in Australia.
Yeah. I believe they're all Australian actors. I think so.
Is Heath Ledger Australian? That was one of the questions I was having.
I'm pretty positive.
I thought he was American.
I know Abby Cornish is Australian. I'm pretty positive he is. Jeffrey Rush, I think, might be English.
Yeah, born in Western Australia. Wow.
Or Joffrey.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, he died in 2008. That's a lot.
Yeah. Not too long after. I mean, it was like the Dark Knight filming, right?
I think that was the last film he did. Yeah, he didn't even finish. I don't even think.
He was in a little bit of that one movie. I don't remember the name of it. They couldn't finish filming it, and I had a bunch of other actors finish his parts for some reason.
The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow, so this was actually close to one of his last movies he did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's kind of like a little bit maybe haunting, the fact that like what he died from, even if it was accidental or whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and he was kind of known for just kind of delving, and a lot of actors maybe delving pretty deep into their roles. It's this one being pretty dark. Joker being a pretty dark role as well.
For sure. I think that's kind of credited as being, and you see Jared Leto sort of did a similar thing with his Joker role, but almost over the top, whereas Heath Ledger, was kind of almost scary, with like almost hauntingly so as the Joker.
Yeah.
But we have, Candy is very pregnant, and it almost seems like as the scene goes on, she gets more and more pregnant by the day.
Yeah.
Because it's only like 3 days they were trying to detox. Mm-hmm. And I felt like her belly got bigger each time, or like each day that went by.
Yeah.
And I don't know if maybe that was an oversight or just a story plot or something, because, I mean, she was pretty decently far along by time that last day when she eventually has the miscarriage. Mm-hmm. But they do such a gnarly job. And, I've never been an addict of crazy drugs, but I've dealt with detox of various things, much smaller scale than this, but that's a fairly accurate depiction of that right. Just pure anxiety, that misery, that absolute hell that you're going through.
Yeah, we see people die from this kind of stuff, it's nuts. So that whole thing, that whole detox scene for me is, one of the thing leading up to it. It's kind of hard to watch almost,
I definitely agree. Like that, from that until the hospital scene was just like, I had to pause twice during that, and just kind of, I like walk around my house. I was like, so what are y'all doing? Like just trying to find like something else to do. Like that was probably like the hardest for me to watch.
Did anyone watch it with you?
No, I try, and I kind of like was sad because like once I watched this one, I was like, this is, of all the movies we've watched so far, like this would be one I wish I should have watched with somebody.
It totally ruined my entire day for the rest of the day after this movie.
Like I said, I had to wait until I was in like a good mental space because I knew what to kind of prepare for. And
we didn't even have any warning. I didn't really know what to expect going into it. So that's kind of messed up.
I asked like 4 people to watch it with me.
I haven't. Yeah, I mean, I probably hadn't seen it in like well over 12 years or so. I think it was high school when I watched it.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's pretty heavy. That whole scene and the leading up. When she kind of goes into labor, right? Like that whole part. And having a kid myself, that's some scary stuff, you know.
Well, she doesn't just go into labor, so they know that the child is gonna die.
Mm-hmm.
And so they make a point of saying she went into labor too soon and she's gonna have to deliver a basically dead child.
Yeah, stillborn.
And I feel like that hits a little different. I obviously don't have children of any kind, and I have zero experience with that, but I cannot even imagine as a woman, you know, not only knowing that what you're going through is going to be basically fruitless, but having to still deliver the child.
Right.
You know, and they show it so well, you know, just the pure agony in her face. Yeah. They won't give her, I'm pretty sure they don't give her pain meds because they know she's a junkie.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, you know, Dan, Heath Ledger's character, asks to hold the stillborn child. And he's like, oh, I saw a twitch. And the doctor has to tell him, you know, it's a spasm. Mm-hmm. The child is dead. There's no life there.
It's definitely the most...
Pretty wretched.
It's definitely the most uncomfortable scene, yeah. I skipped a little bit on that end. Like, I've already seen it, so I was like, I didn't want to watch it. And I forgot about the part about the drugs, you know, them kind of denying her, because... If you remember when Dan's in the hospital, he's like, oh, I need some morphine. And the guy kind of looks at his pupils.
Yeah, he's like, you're not in pain.
He's like, I don't think you're feeling any pain at all. And he's like, right.
He's like, worth a try at least.
We kind of see a bit of a turnaround after that, too, I think. The kind of things seem like they're going to get a little better, maybe.
Well, that's as soon as they cut from that scene, it's her not being an escort anymore. Because if you remember... Early in the movie, she's an escort, so she's at a brothel. Yeah. Which in a lot of those countries are legal, but it cuts to from that scene to her being on the street. And Dan in the car waiting for her to finish, getting the money, and then immediately trying to buy drugs. And that's when they get the bad batch of drugs.
Right, yeah. Yeah,
so like I feel like from there, that's where they go to where they dive off the cliff almost completely. And then they sort of turn around after that where they're like, they tell their old friend that's now a dealer, hey, we're thinking about moving out in the country. He's like, what difference is that going to make? Mm-hmm. Like, well, at least the air is cleaner, you know? And that's when they sort of, you know, attempt to turn around.
Yeah, that's right. And they end up in the, like that country, wherever
the farmhouse.
Thing, yeah. Do they find, oh no, that's after when they live in there. Things get kind of a little weird for Candy, where Dan kind of seems to do his... kind of trying to do better and stuff. She starts to act a lot different, you know, towards him.
Yeah, she hooks up with that gas station guy. Yeah. And they're, you know, she's smoking some weed with him. They have her family over to attempt to do a Sunday lunch.
Right.
And it's just a complete disaster. And that's kind of when you get an insight that, you know, Candy has a lot more going on than just the drugs. She's been miserable her whole life. Mm-hmm. She's had... Her mom has berated her whole life. She says, you know, I've not unclenched my fists since I was 6 years old.
See, I noticed that. Like, I picked that up like early on. Well, with I think she was like whipping.
The whipped
cream.
She's
making whipped cream. I picked that like tension up like then, and then. Mm-hmm. Whenever they were, and obviously you can tell like they were looking for like the chicken and like digging for it and everything, like you can tell like how it's gonna go, and then obviously the chicken ended up being expired, and they're like, oh, he was like, I can just baste it with a bunch of stuff, and I was like, what did he say? Like, hang on. I was like, no, oh my god. So yeah, I honestly like that was. I don't know what it was about this scene. Like I know that's kind of weird, but that scene kind of hurt. Like not the most, but like I felt it because it was just like it seemed like they were trying, you know, like they were actually like trying. Like obviously they were like a hot mess, and like they were. It was not. They weren't trying. They were trying. They were doing their best, like for what they were, and what they had to offer, you know. No. And they just like no.
You brought up a good point about, you know, maybe her having some underlining mental trauma or issues or something, maybe with their parents or who knows. And I think a lot with drug addiction, some people are able to use drugs recreationally, they can have fun with it, and then there's other people kind of the other side that they dip into it and they go overboard because it's kind of coping or
it's their
means
only,
to,
their only coping.
And a lot of the time they have no idea that's what it is, or why they're doing it. And I think maybe that's kind of the difference between her and Dan, is maybe Dan doesn't have that so much, but so maybe it didn't affect him as hardcore as it did her,
And you sort of see that with Casper. You asked about Casper earlier.
Yeah.
He's kind of the recreational. He's like a assistant professor or full-time professor, chemist. He's making heroin basically in his school lab. He has a normal life, but at the same time, he still has this drug addiction. And right around this time, after Candy hooks up with the gas station guy, Dan goes back to hang out with Casper, and he tells him, he's like, promise me you'll quit before I do. Promise me you'll quit before I quit. And I feel like Dan could have almost gave up the drugs. I feel like it wasn't quite as an addiction for him.
Yeah.
But with Dan being there, he's like, well, Dan tells him, he's like, oh, you should just fuck off, because he's trying to get high after being off the heroin and on methadone for so long, because Candy has essentially left him at this point.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, maybe I should. And then he gives him the needle to set him up a shot. And I think that kind of sets up, Casper eventually overdoses. Dan finally Dan comes in and finds his body as he overdoses. And I think he's realizing then, he's like, I've got to make some decision here, what I'm going to do, what I'm not going to do.
I should have seen it coming, like his overdose of anybody, kind of like think about it, try to think ahead in the movie, like what you think is going to happen. And when it did, like when that scene happened, I was like, dang, like I probably should have, there was maybe some foreshadowing here, right. But I didn't, I didn't pick up on it. So I was assuming that like Candy or Dan was going to die. So and that was going to be, and then one of them was going to end up overdosing, just kind of like a typical, unfortunately, situation. But yeah, the main, the enabler, but also the positive.
Yeah, he was kind of like their father figure in a way, especially for Dan. It seemed like he kind of confided in him a lot for advice, and, not just getting drugs and money from him, but advice about his life and what's happening. And, I think to lose him was kind of like a bit, maybe a little eye-opening for him,
For sure.
Yeah, so after that, you see Dan, Candy's in the hospital, and he has a job or something, right? He's working at a kitchen or something like that.
He's a dishwasher, I think.
Candy's in a mental institution.
And that's after she kind of snaps and writes all over the, the inside of the house and stuff, right? I mean,
the writing on the wall.
That whole...
kind of like a poem about Candy and Dan.
Yeah. That whole... I mean, I think that happens before Casper dies, but it's maybe a little bit around that. But yeah, she just covers the whole house and this story about their life and how they met. It's kind of crazy. How she was just kind of losing her mind essentially. But and I guess after she ends up in the hospital, Dan kind of moves on, gets a job, and then she just shows up out of nowhere. And he's like, oh, well, just tell her I'm not here. But, he eventually kind of talks to her anyway. So, after they talk for a little bit and she kisses him, it kind of flashes back to that little, carnival ride thing in the beginning of the movie, where they're, being, pulled against the sides of the wall in that carnival ride. And he just kind of clicks.
Speaking of which, that ride, do you remember the Shrimp Fest?
The Shrimpery. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, Shrimpery, yeah. So when we were younger, there was this festival that would always happen near our hometown. And it was basically, there's a ride just like that. And we rode it 12 times in one night. And I ended up throwing up all over the back of his dad's truck.
Yeah, it was awesome.
I'm mad that y'all have a
think of that every time I see it.
I had a Yamboree where we celebrated yams.
I think Yamboree is an East Texas thing. I've seen some before. Yeah.
It's a big thing.
Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that almost the whole movie every now and again.
Me too, yeah. I think about it every time I see one of those. So they kind of, talk a little bit, and Dan pretty much says, I mean, I think he comes to the conclusion that maybe they're not good for each other, right? I mean,
yeah, and that's what I kind of took from it too. Is I think that I feel like he was maybe sober during that period, and Kendi was like completely sober and doing well. And he kind of points out, they had a toxic relationship. Like there was no good in that. Like obviously, if you loved each other, that's hard to turn away from. But at the same time, they weren't good for each other.
No,
Dan wasn't in a great spot. I mean, he knew that she was coming, and she came a day early. She said, I couldn't wait, because he was like, I thought it was tomorrow. Like, I couldn't wait to come see you.
Right.
And I think she wanted to be with him. But then when he said that, she's like, kind of realized, yeah, you're right. We aren't good for each other. This isn't going to be healthy. He's like, if you're given a reprieve, you have to realize how thin it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like she was brought out of that hell, possibly he was brought out of that hell. And I don't think the movie was about him in any way.
I was actually talking about this in my personal life, not me personally, but about some people that I know, about addicts being recovering or not recovering, especially something with like heroin. It's kind of almost a recipe for disaster, because as soon as one slips up, the other one it's only a matter of time before they get back into it too. And then it's kind of just like a seesaw, clean, sober on either side. And I think with them, that's kind of what was happening, or what probably would have happened if they would have stayed together. They would have just like went back and forth,
Absolutely.
Like I said, this movie, pretty heavy subject matter, some real dark stuff in it. I don't think it's perfect by any means. I don't think it's meant for everyone. So, Landry, would you recommend this movie?
Yeah, I wouldn't just like recommend it to anybody, but yeah, I would recommend it to, it would depend on like the person, the situation. Like I didn't hate the movie. I didn't enjoy watching it the entire time. But I don't think that made it like a bad movie, if that makes sense. So it would kind of depend. Like obviously there are a bunch of trigger warnings that you went over at the beginning that I would kind of have to take into account before I recommended it. But overall, like, yeah, I would like recommend it. It would just kind of depend on the person.
Yeah. And what about you, Darth?
Man, that's a tough one, because I feel like these stories deserve to be told, and I think it's an important place to tell this kind of story. And it's not a bad movie. It's rough to watch, man. You have to, I feel like you said, how you had to get in the proper mindset. I think you should probably get in the right mindset if you're going to watch this. I think if any of the topics in the film are going to wreck your day, then maybe give it a wait. Preferably watch it with somebody. But I'm going to say a strong maybe.
Right, yeah.
It's good, but it's rough. It's very rough.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't think it's for everyone. I do think it's a good movie. I don't think it's perfect. I think it's a little underrated, and the acting, in my opinion, is really well done. Maybe, now that he mentioned it before, Darth, some of the scenes maybe a little kind of falling flat here and there. But, I mean, I would...
Kind of forced, yeah.
Yeah. And I would recommend this, but I don't think I would recommend it to, like, everyone or just anyone. Maybe somebody kind of, like, familiar with some of the stuff. If you have that
experience in your life, yeah, and then, exactly. And if you've had something with this.
Yeah, and even then it might be a little triggering, like, some people don't want to see that or relive maybe some stuff they experienced, with themselves or a partner or something. But anyway, I look forward to doing the next one.
For sure.
And join us next time
for Geek Squawk,
where the geeks talk.